Hey, welcome back. This is my channel, Learn Payload with Colin. And we're in the beginning of our first 100 video series where I'm just going through step by step and going through very specific topics and learning payload along the way. And so far we've connected to a database. We've set up some globals, so a global config for our site title and tagline. So this headline here and this subhead is controlled by Payload. You can see I have, in our last video we started creating general settings in a similar way that you would expect to see in WordPress if you're familiar with WordPress. And I added one more item from the last time we put this together, and that is the logo. So we had the title, the tagline in the previous video, but now I have a logo, and then also we have global navigation. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to undo all of that. I'm going to reset back to where we were in my last video and then build all of this stuff up once again. And yeah, so let's get started. Okay, so yes, now we're back to where we were when we first started. And now we can go back to the front page. There we go. All square. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to add, heel line. We're going to add the logo, and then also, hopefully we'll be able to do this quickly. We'll add the logo and then also the menu system. Now, because I added the logo, so it's of type upload, and it needs to be in relation to your media collection, and then required true. Because I did the required true, just be aware of the fact that because I already have a document set up for general settings, this document does not include the logo yet, and so it's detecting that there's going to be some potential data loss as a result, because if this were not required or I had a default in here, I might not end up getting any errors. But because it is required, it is not allowed to be an empty value. And so let's just go ahead and accept that. And sometimes the result of this will mean actual loss of data. So just be aware that you may lose data while you're in development. And let's see what we have. Yeah, you see, so now my headline and subhead are gone, but that's fine. We'll go in there and add it back. But you can see now I have a logo field. So we currently do not have any logos, so I'm going to create a new one. I already have a logo. I think this might be it. Yeah. Okay. So now if we go back to here. Not going to see the logo yet, but we have our title and subhead back, but now we're going to add the logo. And so to create a logo, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a couple providers, context providers, so standard React sort of Next.js stuff, because what I want to do now is, instead of having I'll show you what I'm talking about. In my front end app, you'll see that I have this title, tagline, general settings thing right on my home page. This is really not ideal. And before I continue down this path, I'd really like to try to clean some of this up. I never intended to have this stay here. I do want to treat this as sort of a global settings that can be accessed anywhere, either on the client or from server side. But let's start with the client, and we're gonna provide access to this global setting, these general settings through a context provider. I think you'll find that very helpful. It keeps things nice and organized. You don't have to copy and paste all this stuff all the time either. So first, what we're going to do is we're going to create a providers. We need a components folder. And because we have our app divided between Payload and our front end, I like to segment our components based off of that as well. Although, yeah, you can organize these any way you see fit, but for now I'm sticking with this pattern here. And we'll call this providers, and then providers.tsx. We're going to use this as our sort of container for all of the additional providers. So our first provider, which will control the general settings, is, you guessed it, probably a general settings provider. And I'm just going to paste this in. And of course, always remember that context providers are client-based components. And I just copied and pasted this from my main repo. And pretty typical, if you're familiar with React context, this might be familiar, but maybe not. But this is pretty standard context management. So here I'm creating a context, React context, and then just type hinting it so that the output of the context is going to be my general setting. So it's going to result in this object here. So now I have a hook I created this hook called use settings, and then just some error checking to make sure that it's wrapped in a settings provider. And then you grab your settings out of the context, and again check to see if the settings is there, and then just return the settings. So pretty simple, standard context stuff. So now I'm going to add it to my main provider. And let's see. So this requires children. And I'm not making this one a client component. From here, this is where I'm going to be doing my server-side queries to get the data from Payload. And before I do that, I got to back up a little bit and go back into my globals config here, general settings. And what I like to do, again, this is my personal organizational preferences, but I'm going to create a file in here. I like to what they call a co-locate functionality around particular categories of data. And so we have a category of data called general settings. Well, instead of having one giant centralized function for getting all of my data in all different types of categories, I'm going to have if I want to get my general settings data, well, my fetcher or my query will be in a file inside the general settings. So I'll call it query, just for lack of a better, or queries. .ts. And from there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just write an async function. And here we just do, we'll just do this. Okay. Never. No, wrong config. There we go. All right. And the reason why I'm putting general settings here inside of a separate variable rather than hard coding it is because in the future I'll be adding some additional functions in here that require that same slug, so we'll just keep it as a separate variable. But I also like to make sure it's type set or type hinted, because if you look in here, if you hover over here, it already knows that you have certain slugs that were associated with your global settings, and so it will prevent you from doing a typo. So like if I did something like that, you would see, hey, no, that's not going to work. All right, so this is a raw query, and so there's no caching or anything like that. In my next video, I'm going to be doing performance improvements on this stuff and adding caching and revalidation. But for now, we're just going to be going straight to the database and every single request. So that's not ideal, but I just want to get through this video fairly quickly. So now that we have the query, we can go and grab settings. This needs to be an async. Great, great, great. Now we have a settings provider. Now with this settings provider now, we have access to this use settings function, which you use inside of a client component. So our first client component is going to be a header, and the header is going to include the menu system that we're going to be creating in our next video, as well as the logo. So let's create that. We're going to create a new file. And because the header is really part of the layout, I like to keep things organized, and I'll just say layout, and then we'll do header.tsx, and we'll make this a use client. And just make sure we're getting things wired up correctly. We're going to go back to our layout. And first of all, we need to add our provider file. There we go. Make sure we didn't break anything. All good. So now let's, inside of here, I'm going to add our header. And there we go, header. So now that we have our hook, we can just say const settings equals use settings. And now we should be able to get our title. We're not going to put the title here, but I just want to show you what that will look like. Yeah, you see here, learn payload. So that means we can also now use this use settings inside of our page. But we'll move on to that later. But here we're focusing on now is the logo, because there's some things you need to be aware of when you're dealing with media objects and the way the types are generated. It was a little bit confusing to me at first, but the community, if you ever need help, the Discord channel and or the forum has been a great place for figuring some of this stuff out. They're very helpful over there. And I'll show you the issue that I ran into. All right, so let's get a logo going. Okay. And because we're going to be grabbing the logo out of our new use settings hook, we do need this to be a client. Okay, now what we're going to do is say const logo. And inside of now take a look at this. You don't need this question mark because we know for a fact that settings is going to be available, because in my hook, I say if settings is not available, we're just going to error out. There's something really wrong with your website if settings is not available. So yeah, no need for an optional settings. So we know it's going to exist there. But here's the tricky part. Look at the type on here. It says number or media. And the reason why Payload does this, generates this type for you, when in reality we know it's not a number, it is going to be a media object. But Payload doesn't really know that during runtime. Because of the depth, you can go into more detail on their documentation on what depth means. But basically what it comes down to is that when you're doing a related field, you get to define how deep does the API return that related field. At the very top, depth of 0, it returns an ID on that object, just the ID, nothing else. So that's why you have a number for that type. If it's depth 0, then that's going to be a number. But if it's anything more than that, then what it does is it brings in the JSON or the object of that related table and into the API. And so that at that point it becomes, in case of relating to the media object, the media now is also part of the type. So it can be a number or a media. But in this case, we know that it's not going to be a number. It's going to be the full object, because if you look at our query, we have depth 1. So if this were depth 0, it would come back as just the number. And you can actually see this in the admin panel. If you go into the API up here, you can see here we have depth of 1, and we do get the entire logo, including the URL that we're going to use for our logo component. But if I were to set this to 0, look at that, a number 1. Obviously, that's not going to work. I mean, you could do that, but it just means you would need to make a follow-up query to the media to get that by ID, and we don't want that. We just want it all together in one thing. So we have that. So the issue now, the reason why this was an issue for me is because I want access to that URL, and if I did this, TypeScript is complaining that URL does not exist on type number or media. meaning it has to exist on both the number or media. And that's just not the case. But basically what you need to do is you need to say, there's a few things. You can just say if type of equals number, and this again doesn't need a question mark, then you can just return return null. Or if you want, I mean something's really wrong if it is a number, so in this case what I would probably do is like throw an error, like something like that. But now that we have an escape clause on the type of logo, you're no longer going to get, TypeScript's now going to know that, well, apparently it's not a number, so it must be a media object. So now what we can do is we can say so now you can see logo is, TypeScript is saying, knows now that logo is the media object. And I have an exclamation mark here because it's still possible that this URL could be empty. So, but it's not empty. So, or we can also add this not, there we go. So now, yeah, so there's a few ways to get around it. You can use exclamations or kind of force types and things like that, but this was the path that I went down. And this is probably, you're going to be doing this kind of thing a lot in Payload, and so just be aware of that. It's really not that bad. It's actually, it sort of reinforces good programming practices in my opinion. So yeah, so this is going to work just fine. All right, so now let's add the logo to the header. And we don't need settings anymore. In fact, I don't think we need use client either. And there we go. There is our logo. All right, so that's it for this video. I don't want to, it's already going on a little too long, but I promise I will follow up in my next one. We're going to go over the menu system and then also caching and revalidation. So, all right, look for that in an upcoming video. Make sure you click subscribe to get notified so when that comes out, hopefully today. All right, thanks a lot.